Okay, hello everybody, and welcome back to another Pencil live stream with me, Tom Edwards, the head of content here at Pencil. This week we are going to be talking all things sustainability and Gen AI. We know it is a subject that many people are very interested about, and some of our friends at the Brandtech group are joining me. So I've got Ludo from 55, who is a global sustainability director, and Sharanya, a Gen AI operations manager from Brandtech. So Ludo, Sharanya, thanks so much for jumping on to this conversation. I'm really excited to get chatting. How are you both doing? We all good?
All good.
Wonderful, good stuff. So look, the reason why we are kind of talking today is really that there is a lot of conversation out there about sustainability and Gen AI. I think there's a lot of people talking, but perhaps there isn't a lot of certainty out there in the market right now because the technology is so new, and so hopefully a very interesting one to discuss. So I guess the first question would be, what is Brandtech and 55 doing at the group level on sustainability that marketers will really want to know about? So why don't I
Yes,
come to you first, Ludo?
yes, thank you. So I think the first thing to highlight is that obviously we define a strategy together with other sustainability managers from the other brand tech companies. We define a joint strategy. The idea is, first of all, to understand, to account for the impact that we have and to make sure that we have set targets to reduce that and commit on that. And of course, then embark our the different partners of the companies so that they are pushed towards these objectives. That's the idea. So the first thing is to understand the impact that we have, and that's one of the reasons why we needed that kind of study, that kind of work. We needed to understand the impact of Gen AI, but other technologies as well, to make sure that we can account for this impact and reduce it. So that's what we have done at 55 on our end with the different studies that we have conducted in the past years, starting in 2021. So we released a study about the impact of media activities, so digital media campaigns, then websites, and finally Gen AI earlier this year for the Brandtech group.
Excellent. And so we're talking here about one study in particular that was released by Brandtech earlier this year. So, I mean, Sharanya, do you want to give us a brief intro to that study itself and kind of what, I guess, prompted Brandtech to commission it in the first place, and why this year in particular was an especially good time to do it?
Yeah. I think we've been having, some of these conversations for since we, acquired Pencil, and since we started to see the impact that we knew that Gen AI was going to have, not on only our businesses, but obviously our clients. And I think us at Brandtech, we started with the philosophy that we can't shy away from the difficult questions. We have to kind of lean in, maybe even earlier than our clients were thinking about them or asking about them. When we actually began the study back in 2024, no one was really looking at quantifying emissions specifically for Gen AI in marketing. But, based, as Ludo said, we can't have conversations around mitigation without also having the data. So that was why it was kind of important for us to set out on the study, knowing that it's kind of an opaque and difficult place to find data. There's not a lot of transparency, but we knew we had to kind of make a first foray into this. So the study that we released in May is kind of our first round of work that we did with 55 and in collaboration with Scope 3. But we hope to expand on that as well in the coming months.
I guess we should probably just very briefly, for anyone tuning in who maybe isn't familiar with the Brandtech family, Ludo, do you want to give us a brief intro just to 55 so that people kind of know who it is that we're speaking about here? Perhaps should have done that at the top, so that one's on me. But do you want to give us a brief intro, Ludo?
Sure. 55 is a data consulting company. So basically, we help our clients use data in order to develop their brand sustainably. And so data is also very useful to account for environmental impacts, and that's the reason why we released the different studies I mentioned earlier. in order to be able also to quantify the impact of what we do for our clients. So yeah, that's basically who 55 is. And I don't know, maybe Sharanya, you want to say a word about the Brandtech group?
Sure. Well, I sit on the Brandtech kind of GenAI and emerging technology team. So we're looking at more holistically, how do we look at AI, deploying AI responsibly, and at scale for our clients. So, yeah.
Good stuff. Excellent. So yeah, we talk a lot, I think, at Pencil about the wider Brandtech family, but this, I think, is the first kind of piece of work that we've done with our friends at 55, certainly since I've been here, which, granted, is not that long actually. But so look, let's dig into the report a little bit then. So there's a key difference here between training and inference, and I think lots of people in the AI world will know immediately what we're talking about when we talk about a difference between training and inference, but perhaps the marketing world may not yet kind of think too much about that distinction, because I think really in the marketing world we tend to be at the end where you're just getting something that's useful and you're putting it out there into the world, right? So it's perhaps less of a immediate concern. So I don't know who's best placed to take this one, but does one of you want to give us an idea on the difference between training and inference and why that's crucial for this conversation?
So the first thing is when you want to use a Gen AI model, right, you need to train that model. So basically to put this model in front of many different situations, use a lot of data in order for the model to be able to give a very quick and efficient, precise answers to any type of matters in that area. So that's the idea of training. Right? So first of all, you need to set it up basically to make sure that you have the model available and ready to answer complex questions that could be to generate text, to generate images, generate videos, etc. Or that could be just to classify a bunch of elements, etc. So that's the training part of it. It was a strong focus because obviously at the very beginning of the emergence of GenAI, basically beginning of 2023, a lot of models were being trained, but there's also the inference stage. So it's basically when you use the model, when you interact with it, then the model will execute what you ask for. That's the inference part. So regarding the training impact, that's what we studied here in the first place. What we saw is that it highly depends on the size of the model, the number of parameters. So the larger the model, basically, the more time you will need to train it, because it will need to crawl more data, explore more different situations, and therefore should get a better quality. That's the idea. Depending on how you do it, it could be not that efficient. And when we looked at, for instance, one of the Lemma 3 collection models,
okay.
We saw that it generated over 1,500 tons of CO2 equivalent. Right, that's quite a lot. It's about 60 times a travel around the world by car, or like 50 times the carbon footprint of a UK citizen, for instance. So it's quite huge, right, if you think about it. And it's just one of the model of the Lemma 3 collection. And if we look at the volumes of models that are published out there, we're talking about thousands of models published every month to the Hugging Face platform, right? To the open source Hugging Face platform. So that means part of it multiplied by thousands, right? That could be a huge number. But when we look at inference, right? If you look at the inference stage, and you compare it with what I just said about training, it goes a lot beyond that, right? So basically, if you look at all the models trained and published to platforms, we're talking about millions of tons of CO2 equivalent, which is rather the level of carbon footprint of a state, right? So it's huge. But when you look at inference, it's a lot more than that, right? And for instance, for such a highly heavily used collection as Lemma 3, it's over 90% of the energy consumption and the CO2 equivalent that is at inference stage. So it's a lot greater. The good news behind the very bad news of the impact is that actually users have a hand in this, right? So basically, the usage of the models is the bigger part of the carbon footprint, and it's getting bigger and bigger. So we have control of this, right? It's our use of the platform. We have a hand in this, and the way we do it, uh, understanding that we have an impact and how much it is a very good step towards better using it, um, avoiding unnecessary usage, etc. So that's the good news behind this bad news of the overwhelming impact of using these tools.
And I guess the question I suppose many people will be asking is like how is that different from just traditional compute? Should we assume that this is a step change from the internet as we knew it before the AI revolution, let's say?
So yeah, if you take any cloud process, right, whether it's an SQL query, whether it's just loading elements or replicating servers, replicating contents, sorry, on a given server, these are processes that are that require a lot less energy. Because of the way AI behaves, it requires quite a lot of hardware, and this hardware, so GPUs, basically require more energy than what we used traditionally. And because of that, they also generate more heat, so require more cooling. Anyway, it requires more energy, right? It's energy intensive by design, right? But there are ways to do that in a more responsible way. By the way, we could quote Google's study. So Google just released a study, I think less than 10 days ago, about the carbon footprint and the energy use of their models. It's quite interesting to see what they have done in order to reduce the impact of that. So it's still possible, even if it's an energy-hungry process, it's still possible to improve that with a lot of different optimizations that we can do. So that's I would say the energy optimization side of things.
Yeah.
But there's usage, right? The use is obviously a big part of the problem, and that's where we can act.
Yeah, for sure. Which is quite a nice segue into the calculator. I will just say I can see we've got a few comments coming on some of the posts on LinkedIn. So if you are watching and you have any questions for either of our guests today, Sharanya or Ludo, then drop them into the comments on LinkedIn or YouTube, and I will leave some time for Q&A at the end if anybody has anything that they would like to ask. So Sharanya, are we coming over to you on the calculator that we've developed? Tell us about this, and how it works, and how it can be useful to marketers who may be watching.
Yeah. So when we commissioned this study, we knew that we also wanted to have some kind of practical tools that we could be able to put in kind of marketers' hands. So 55 have built a calculator which is accessible through our website, which is specifically targeted to marketing use cases. So for our first report, we looked at text-to-text generation and text-image generation, and it essentially lets you map by model, by the number of iterations, the number of the size of your output, and you can get some tangible numbers that you can take a look at and compare for your specific kind of marketing use cases. And as we look at further use cases, I'll tease that we're looking at video next. We'll start to expand the calculator, and the goal really is for marketers to be able to kind of map their use cases, model what the emissions might be before you start looking at kind of AI deployment, especially at scale. How can you optimize if you play around with the hosting locations and output length and things like that? Where can you start to see the changes in your footprint? So we're hoping it's a practical way for marketers to feel that they have some numbers behind the use cases that they're looking at, because at the moment measurement is still quite a challenge.
I think it's probably important to sort of reiterate at this point that we're not saying here that using Gen AI in marketing is a bad thing in any way. Like, in fact, actually, it's the most revolutionary force we've probably seen in marketing, probably ever. I guess the point that we're making is that it's important to be informed about these things. Businesses, especially enterprise, are going to have targets around sustainability, around emissions, and all of that sort of stuff. So having data and having insight means that you're able to inform yourself, and then using stuff like this calculator means that you're able to create reports, and you're able to have that kind of level of insight that you can then monitor and make course corrections if you need to, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's actually, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Ludo.
One thing that I think is useful with the calculator is to get an idea of what the impact would be if you deploy a use case. So you can use it before even deploying anything.
Yeah,
that's the good thing. This way you can see if it's a reasonable project or if it's totally out of the world, and that shouldn't be maybe deployed that way, or maybe you should change the way that Sharanya mentioned, right? Maybe you should change where you want to host it, the type of model that you would use, or maybe the way that you design your use case. It actually helps you also design the different steps of your use case. So obviously the idea is not to avoid using GenAI at all, is to make sure that we use it for significant use cases and that we understand the impact before we do it in order to limit it, right, to mitigate it. That's the idea.
I think it's actually like quite prescient right now as well, because we're starting to see efficiency of models actually being an important subject even in the runaway market leaders. If you look at like the GPT-5 launch, for example, they weren't optimizing for hyper intelligence and the evals and benchmarks anymore. They're optimizing for cost per token, and essentially they're going to be optimizing for efficiency over time, right? The energy will be the limiting factor over time, and if you don't pay any attention to efficiency, then actually the models and the outputs probably will also suffer. It was one of the reasons why DeepSeek was able to do so well, was because it was incredibly efficient, right? They were able to use the resources they had available in China, i.e. not all of NVIDIA's leading chips, much more efficiently. And so they were able to drive real gains in performance through doing so. So I think it's actually really very good timing that we at Brand, I would say that I work here, but I think it's very good timing that we're thinking about that now, because it's only going to become more important, driving efficiency in AI. It can't just scale the energy linearly if we expect to continue improving their performance, because eventually you'll just require more energy than the sun, right? Like it just won't work. So I think efficiency is definitely going to be important. So you touched on mitigations there. So you've looked at a few specific mitigations. Ludo, you touched on them. Sharanya, is there anything that you would want to add to these specific mitigations, how marketers should be thinking about them, where they're going to be most useful?
Yeah. So as Ludo said, one of the key findings out of this study was that we have a lot of control over what impact we have given the energy usage that's coming out of the inference side. So there's some fairly common sense but impactful mitigations that you can deploy at just a user level. So things like input and output control, not using old chats with tons of history in the back, because all of that is getting reprocessed every time you ask a question. So asking ChatGPT to be succinct, the difference between 100-word output and 1,000-word output is fairly significant. Picking your model size, maybe you don't need to use the latest iteration, the largest model for commonplace tasks like writing emails or summarizing. So finding that balance between model capability and energy efficiency, and obviously a bit of use case discipline, where is AI really adding value, and making sure you're using it in smart ways. Things like hosting locations and also play a big part in it. Obviously, that becomes a challenge if you're using kind of off-the-shelf tools, but if you're in a position to be able to self-host and choose kind of your carbon trial location, that makes a big difference as well. So they're not, revolutionary, but they actually make pretty significant impacts on the numbers, and all of that adds up, if we all start to deploy best practice.
Mm.
To get into more details regarding the numbers around that, for instance, Sharanya mentioned the size of the output. Most of the energy used by the models is not to understand the question that you ask it, but rather to produce the results, to write down content or to produce an image or obviously a video. So that's where most of the energy will be used, like over 99% of it. So if you ask for a very straight answer, and if you use a model, by the way, that is less chatty, it requires a lot less energy. There were a lot of comments right lately about ChatGPT 5 versus Furrow, etc. One of the reasons why, and that's not me saying that, right? It's definitely OpenAI. The reason also why ChatGPT 5 is less chatty is because also it requires less energy, right? That's a very important part of that. So if you basically ask for the size of content that you really want, right, instead of asking to summarize after you have got that big output, that's a lot better in terms of energy. And to give you an example of, if you take a series of actions to mitigate the carbon footprint of a given use case, with like reasonable hypothesis, we calculated that you can divide that by 4, right? You can divide the carbon footprint of a given use case by 4 if you just put into place a little bit of best practices. So it's not. We didn't get to the bottom of that, right? We can do a lot more than divide it by 4. So you can see that, yes, it's important. Another example, very detailed example, we used Pencil's data. So Pencil shared with us a little bit of usage data, overall usage data. And we noticed that depending on the users or depending on the accounts, depending on the way that the solution was leveraged, it was required to generate more or fewer images to get to a final creative, right? A final set of creatives. And this number can be divided by 20 or 50 even for the best use cases. The best users tend to get a lot better results. So if training is a big part of it, right? If you've got users that actually really understand how to leverage the solution, how to rely on the power of Pencil in a very good way, they can get to better results quickly and therefore reduce significantly the number of iterations. So that's definitely, I think, the biggest part of it. Awareness and training for users and users is a very big part of that.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I guess there's an actionable kind of idea here for maybe junior marketers who want to embrace AI, is if you're optimizing for one thing in your career, it's optimized for the efficiency of your prompting, right? Like, be the person who can get there with one prompt. And then if you're competing with people that are taking 10 prompts to get to the same output, then if you compound that over weeks, months, and years, you're going to be really successful, right? As an AI operative, as an AI creative. So yes, that is an interesting idea. And, I think that is increasingly going to be a metric that people pay a lot of attention to is, generations per asset. How many times are you having to run this until you get to the thing that's really good? And people who are really great at using these tools will be crunching that right down. And so they will almost naturally be the most sustainable creatives, even though really what they're optimizing for is quality creatives. That's an interesting point. So look, I want to come on to video because I know that that's the next phase of what you're going to be looking at. So how do you expect, because up until now, really what we've been talking about is text and image to a certain extent. Video, obviously, AI generated video has exploded over the last few months, so I can see why it's on your radar. What are the big differences between what we've been discussing to now and the explosion of video?
So that's the second round, right? Second work that we're doing on this topic. The big difference, and that's the reason why we had to develop another study, another methodology, is that the architecture of the models are very different from what you can see for LLM, just to generate text or generate images. It requires obviously creating movement. The steps taken by the model in order to get to the bottom of the generated video are very different depending on the model that you use. And because of that, we had to, and that's what we're doing, right? We have to conduct experiments with various types of models to understand how they behave, what are the different steps taken exactly, and how energy intensive are these different steps. This way, it will enable us to understand where optimizations lie, right? What we can do in order to get the best results with less energy, right? Basically using fewer kilowatt hours. And yeah, it's still ongoing. We haven't got to the bottom of that yet, but I think it's obviously the first numbers. There are some studies. There are some numbers out there. Hugging Face and Sasha Luciani has conducted a few experiments on her own on that topic, and the numbers are quite worrying, right? If you take an example of video, it could be 200 times or 300 times more emissions than generating an image. So we need to get to the bottom of that to understand exactly what type of use cases, what type of models, what length of videos. There are a lot of things that we need to know in the creative process, right? So to focus on the marketer's work and see how we can leverage these models in a good way without using too many resources, too much energy, right? That's the idea.
Excellent. Okay, and so Sharanya, I'll come over to you for this next one. So how can product teams like Pencil, but like anybody watching this, like safely surface these kinds of emissions metrics to users without like putting friction in their product?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as we've been talking about, I think measurement is going to be really key, for all product teams, Pencil included. As you know, we're actively working with Pencil to kind of bring some of this measurement data into the platform and other kind of workflow mitigations. I guess the philosophy we've been thinking about with Pencil is, as the user, where in your workflow can you make optimizations? How can we surface those in a light touch way that empowers users without compromising on the efficiency of their work and the quality of their work? So I think the biggest thing is to start finding ways to bring this data to the surface without, as you said, creating too much friction or interfering in the creative process. I think the good thing to note is that clients are increasingly asking these questions. I think we anticipate stricter environmental regulations to be on the horizon. Clients are asking for AI-related emissions data in their reporting. So being the platforms that help surface that data for clients is just going to become an increasingly important part of leadership in this space.
Yeah, I agree. So we've got a few questions and we're sort of running against time. So I'd love to jump over to questions in the comments. So Anna Haggerty, who's regular viewer, I think we've had questions from Anna before. Anna, great to have you back with us. She says, regarding efficiency and prompting, do you think it's better to, one, refine each question as you go to tailor the answer to your needs, or two, leave a 45-minute prompt with exact details? So I think she's talking about the difference between iterating versus writing extremely long prompts to get everything in there. Do either of you have a view on that?
So there are, maybe I could try and take this one, and I think Sharanya, you will have a lot more to say on this. But just a quick thing is it highly depends on what you're trying to do. Right? For instance, if you're generating a video, because video generation requires quite a lot of time and therefore a lot of energy. And anyway, it would be a waste of your time if you didn't take time to optimize it. It could be actually good to rely on a model, on an LLM, to create the right prompt. And as you go, you will see that the structure of your prompt for the videos it's quite easy. There are a lot of tutorials out there that could help you design, the video generation prompts in a very good way. So I think starting from there is very important. If you look at generating something that will take time and therefore take a lot of resources, it's very good to take time to build the right prompt and even rely on another model, smaller one, to get the right prompt. And that's basically also what you can do with Pencil. There are features for that. So that's what I would do. For other types of processes, if you want a very straight answer, like iterating a lot, obviously is a nightmare. And a very good example of that, and I don't know if you read the examples that were out there in some articles, is the thank you. The thank you thing when using chatbots that generates a bunch of energy used for not much, because I don't think the models is learning anything from a thank you note. So that's an example. But
I'm going to put my hand up here. I do that, and I'm going to stop now. I hadn't even thought about it, but I say it's just fun. Yeah, it is strange how we kind of develop these like relationships with the AI that you want to say thank you when you would never say thanks to Google for a search, But yeah, Sharanya, did you have any thoughts? Did you want to come on this one as well?
No, I think Ludo covered it. I think if I had to just look at what Anna said, I would say your best bet is actually prompting as much as you can at the beginning versus iterating. As Ludo said, the energy comes at the most when the model is outputting. So the less times you need to do that, the better.
Yeah. Okay.
That makes me think of something else. You're right, Sharanya. There's also the learning process, right? Basically, leveraging these tools takes skills, and it's better if you take a little bit of time to create good prompts instead of iterating all the time, which will use a lot of energy, and you will not learn if you keep iterating with the models instead of trying to structure your prompt, getting your own models of prompt, etc. You will learn and you will get better at it, and that's, I think, interesting. Especially for marketers, especially if you want to generate creatives, improve your creatives, it's good if you take a little bit of time to generate, especially in your first prompts, right?
Yeah.
I think it makes sense.
Yeah, there's a point there just about the fact that we don't want to outsource all of our thinking to the AIs, right? Like it should be a tool that really great creative humans are using to make their creativity 10 times better. Not just dump all of your brain's workload onto ChatGPT and hope for the best, right? Like the people that are really going to succeed, in my opinion, are, as you say, the ones who are actually thinking about what they're doing, putting their own brain to work as well as the digital brain. You're much more likely to have a positive sort of flywheel effect, I think, than just hoping that AI would do everything for you. I don't think that anyone really believes that that's the case anymore. But yeah. All right, well, look, I'm aware we're running up against time, and you've been very generous with your time. Is there anything either of you want to discuss or get across that, I know we haven't covered every single thing that we'd like to. Is there anything that you kind of want to say and get on the stream that we haven't covered so far?
Ludo?
What I could say is, obviously, there's the use case aspect is important. Sharanya has talked about it a little bit, but
yeah,
defining your use cases, assessing their impact, and selecting the ones that really make sense in terms of return on investments and return on carbon footprint, right?
Yeah.
So if you use a technology, whatever it is, GenAI or another, think about what kind of impact you could have environmental impact and how useful it really is, right? And anyway, if you try and deploy use cases, at scale, and they don't really make sense, you won't go there. So you will spend a lot of time creating pilots, pilots and
Yeah.
pilots and pilots, and never getting value from GenAI. This is the worst case scenario. And that's actually something that we can see with any type of technology in the digital area. Leveraging them the right way with the right use cases is definitely the most important part of the process. Instead of blindly trying to deploy so many use cases, but not getting much value. And actually, it also creates, it degrades the adoption level. It's not good. It's definitely not good for your company. You're wasting a lot of time from people. You're gonna make them disappointed. So yeah, taking a little bit of time, at least a little bit of time, thinking about what kind of benefits you will take from these use cases, what kind of impact they would have, and how maybe you should deploy them to get the most with the as little impact as possible is definitely worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Sharanya,
Yeah, I was
anything
just
you want to add?
No, I will
I think we
miss.
may have lost Sharanya's internet connection there.
wait. There we go. Am I back?
You're back. You're
Yes,
back.
go back.
Okay, sorry about that.
All good.
No, I was just gonna add that we touched a little bit on the beginning on this at the beginning, but this is still a very kind of gray area. We're starting to see a couple pieces of data and studies happening. Google released their study recently, which Ludo mentioned, but I would just encourage marketers to start asking your AI partners and your AI providers about their position on this. How do they plan to start tracking emissions data? Start asking these questions. I think that kind of industry push is what we're going to need for more access, more transparency, which is only going to benefit both the clients and hopefully help us reduce impact where we can. So
Brilliant. Well, look, on that note, we will wrap it up for this week, but thank you very much everybody for joining us. Remember, we are here every single Tuesday. We're talking AI, we're talking creative AI, we're talking product updates, and of course, today talking all about sustainability in Gen AI as well. Make sure to hit the subscribe button, follow us on LinkedIn, and tune in every single Tuesday. But for now, I will just say thank you very much, Ludo, Sharanya. Thanks so much for joining us. It's been great to have you on. And we will see you next week.
thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.